This is an argument for the existence of God, that if I were still an atheist, this one line of evidence would convince me that God exists. And here's what it is. Virtually every scientist in the world now believes the universe began at some point in the past. In fact,
that the universe is not eternal.
It's not eternal. It has not always existed. Alexander Vilenkin, the head of the Cosmology Institute at Tufts University, said the proof is now in place that the universe had a beginning. Well, that makes a strong argument for God, because whatever begins to exist has a cause. We now know the universe began to exist. Therefore, there must be a cause behind the universe. Well, then you ask the question, what kind of a cause can bring a universe into existence? It must be transcendent, because it existed apart from the creation. It must be timeless or eternal, because it existed before physical time came into being. It must be immaterial or spirit, because it existed before the physical world was created. It must be powerful, given the immensity of the creation event. It must be smart, given the precision of the creation event. Must be caring, because he created such a wonderful habitat for us to exist in. Must be personal, because he had to make the decision to create. And then the scientific principle of Occam's razor tells us there would be just one creator.
You know what the most repeated phrase in the Bible is? The reoccurring message is repeated 365 times. Watch this.
But let me just give you one example to give you a flavor of this. This is Genesis chapter 1 in Hebrew. Now, I want to remind you that Hebrew goes from right to left. Also, the word Torah in Hebrew is spelled with 4 letters. A ta, which is roughly equivalent to our T, an O, a resh, a he, 4 letters. If you go to the first how in the book of Genesis, and that's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it happens, and you count 49 letters, you come to a vav. You count 49 more letters, and you come to a resh, which is sort of like our R. And you count 49 more letters, you come to a he. So that those 4 letters spelled Torah. Now I need to remind you that all languages flow towards Jerusalem. Did you know that? All nations east of Jerusalem go from right to left. All nations west of Jerusalem go from left to right. All languages flow towards Jerusalem. I don't know what you're going to do with that piece of information, but I think it's interesting. Now, you can follow this without knowing Hebrew, probably, but you say, now why 49? Was the square of 7? Okay, that's fine. That's not too surprising, but just a coincidence, of course. Or is it? Now, you could argue, well, that's just an accident of the frequency of letters and so forth. It's kind of rare, but interesting. Except what happens is when you go to the book of Exodus, you go to the first how, count 49 letters, you get a vav. 49 letters, you get a resh. 49 letters, and you get a he. Same thing happens. What's the probability of that? Whatever the first probability is, it's that squared. Okay? So it's very unlikely. Genesis, Exodus, you go to Leviticus and it doesn't happen, and when it doesn't, you almost feel a sigh of relief. Huh? But when you go to Numbers, the same thing happens backwards. You take the first he, the first resh, the first vav, the first tau, you get Torah spelled backwards. Now that's weird. If nothing else, I don't know how they found this out. They must have had time on their hands. You know, they didn't have computers. You know, this was. You go to Deuteronomy, you have essentially the same equivalent thing happens. And now you're puzzled because you've got it forward, forward, backward, backward. Can't resist going back to Leviticus and looking at Leviticus more closely. We have 49, that's 7 squared letter sequences. Torah, Torah, forward in Genesis, Exodus, backwards in Numbers and Deuteronomy. Well, if you look at Leviticus, you discover that every 7th letter spells the unpronounceable name of God, often rendered Jehovah or Yahweh. expressed as Adonai among the Hebrews. They won't pronounce that name. They'll use the word Lord instead. Well, now we stand back from all of this. We have the name of God, and we suddenly realize that the Torah always points to the name of Jehovah. Now, what's the chance of that happening by accident? And by the way, if you've tried to contrive something like this and still maintain logic in the text, that's a challenge. This is a very non-trivial thing to design if you set out to design it that way. So many of us tend to regard these kinds of things in general as fingerprints of the Holy Spirit.
Dr. Bracken just proved by using ancient manuscripts that the New Testament has more evidence towards it than other figures in history. Check it out.
How many copies of ancient writings do we have? When we talk about somebody like Caesar, the works written about him, we have over 10. Plato? 7. Thucydides? 8. Tacitus? An impressive 20. Suetonius? 8. Homer, writer of the Odyssey and Iliad, an astounding 643, and with the New Testament, an unbelievable 24,000 plus. Why does that matter? Well, because the truth is, we're not exactly sure that what we have with Plato is accurate, but we have a really good idea that the New Testament we have is the one that was intended for us.
The other lines of argument that you talk about in your book is the argument of DNA. And I think years ago I had asked you, what's an argument that you just find so compelling? And you said DNA. And I think you described it, I live here in California, and on the beach, you can find ripples in the sand created by the water, patterns that could happen by seemingly random movement of the water. But if you looked into that sand, you told me, and I saw John loves Sally forever with a big heart around it, you'd say, now, that's different, because that contains information.
Exactly.
That's not pattern, random movement of the elements. That is communicating a message. And that's exactly what DNA is. Unpack that for us.
Yeah, you have 100 trillion cells in your body. If you were to open any one cell and uncoil the DNA, it would be 6 feet tall. Embedded in that DNA is a 6-letter or a 4-letter chemical alphabet that spells out the precise assembly instructions for every protein out of which you're made. So in other words, just as English uses a 26-letter alphabet to spell out words, DNA uses a 4-letter chemical alphabet to spell out the assembly instructions for all that you're made of. That is information. And whenever we see information, whether it's a computer code, whether it's a painting on a cave wall, whether it's a newspaper article, always, always, always there's an intelligence behind it. And so I think that is a powerful argument for God. There is more information in every cell in your body than you would find in 200 years of the Sunday New York Times.
If somebody wanted to do an investigation into Christianity, where would you start?
If the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen, it's a house of cards.
You sure you want to give me that loaded gun?
I'm pretty sure you're not going to be able to pull the trigger.
I've spent my entire career as a journalist, uncovering the truth. Until the day my wife presented me with the biggest story of my life.
I'm not gonna lose my wife and my kids to something that I can't even reason with.
And what happened next changed me forever.
How can we even talk about historical evidence for the resurrection?
The Gospels are filled with contradictions.
The empty tomb is based on evidence. And isn't evidence your trade?
We all bet our lives on something.
The question is, what's it gonna be?
As much as I would like to help out a fellow skeptic, what you're proposing is impossible.
Could Jesus survive being spiked to the cross?
There is no evidence of anyone ever surviving a full Roman crucifixion.
Just because I write something down and I bury it in the dirt, that doesn't make it true.
What I felt was something more real than anything I've ever felt in my life.
I'm praying for you.
Do you really want to know the truth, or is your mind already made up?
Stop blaming me and the church and God and do your job.
No one's ever proven if the shroud is the actual burial cloth of the Christ. But whenever someone looks in those eyes for the first time, suddenly becomes a real person.